Alfred was no ordinary man. Though well into his 70s, his mind was sharp, and his passion for watchmaking had never waned. He had spent decades quietly building an empire in the watch world, creating some of the finest timepieces that had ever graced the wrists of collectors and enthusiasts. His name, though largely unknown to the general public, commanded great respect in exclusive circles where true craftsmanship was appreciated. Yet today, as he stepped into a high-end luxury watch boutique, none of that seemed to matter. Hi there. I'm Goldie, and welcome to Goldie's Love Stories. The bell above the door chimed softly as he entered, a gentle sound drowned out by the gleaming store's quiet hum. Alfred's clothes were simple, a worn tweed jacket, a white shirt frayed at the cuffs, and trousers that had seen better days. He looked every bit the part of a man long past his prime, an unassuming figure lost amidst the dazzling opulence of the shop. The store was immaculate, with polished glass displays showcasing watches worth more than the average person's yearly salary. Velvet-lined cases housed timepieces encrusted with diamonds, their polished surfaces reflecting the soft glow of recessed lighting. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood and leather, an atmosphere of silent exclusivity. As Alfred walked slowly past the displays, his hands in his pockets, he admired the craftsmanship of the pieces before him. He appreciated the meticulous work that went into creating each one, from the finely tuned movements to the delicate engravings hidden on the backs of the cases. These watches were, in many ways, a reflection of his own work, beautiful, precise, timeless. But to the staff behind the counter, Alfred was invisible. Two salesmen stood behind the glass counter, their sharp, tailored suits a contrast to Alfred's understated appearance. They barely glanced at him as he browsed, exchanging smirks as they watched his every move with thinly veiled amusement. One of the men, a tall, slick-haired figure with an air of practiced arrogance, leaned toward his colleague and whispered something, eliciting a chuckle. "Look at him," the younger one said under his breath, loud enough for Alfred to hear. "Probably just wandered in to get out of the cold. No way he's buying anything." The other salesman nodded, smirking. "Maybe he's just here to dream," he added, his tone dripping with condescension. Alfred caught their words but pretended not to hear. He dealt with people like this before, people who saw only the surface, never bothering to look deeper. In his earlier years, before he had made his fortune, he had encountered such scorn on countless occasions. Even now, with all his success, the judgment still came, based solely on appearance. Yet, Alfred had always prided himself on remaining grounded, unaffected by the trappings of wealth. He didn't need flashy suits or lavish displays of affluence. His life's work spoke for itself, or at least it did to those who knew what to look for. Still, the sting of their words dug deeper than he'd expected. Despite everything he had accomplished, a familiar sense of inadequacy crept into his heart. It reminded him of his younger days, long before he had any wealth, when people had often looked down on him for his modest beginnings. Back then, he had been just another poor watchmaker, struggling to make a name for himself in a world that valued wealth above all else. His skill had been his only asset, and even that had been ignored by those who couldn't see past his outward appearance. Alfred paused in front of one particular display, a classic watch with a deep blue dial and a sleek minimalist design. It was understated but elegant, the kind of piece he would have loved to design himself. He leaned in closer, studying the fine details, his practiced eye tracing the smooth contours and precise hands that glided over the face of the watch. This was art, true artistry, and yet to the men behind the counter, it was merely a status symbol, a commodity to be sold to the wealthiest bidder. He straightened up and glanced around the room once more, his eyes flicking back to the salesmen who were now openly laughing. The tall one leaned over, making a theatrical show of wiping a tear from his eye, as though the sight of Alfred's interest in the watch was the punchline of some grand joke. "You think he'll ask how much it costs?" the younger one whispered, just loud enough for Alfred to catch. "Maybe we should tell him the price and watch him run for the door." Alfred felt a tightening in his chest. The words were a sharp reminder of how shallow people could be, how quick they were to judge based on appearances alone. His fortune had been built on decades of hard work, precision, and dedication to his craft. He had never needed to flaunt his success, his creations had always spoken for him. But here, in this store filled with pretense and arrogance, that legacy was invisible. He could have left. He could have walked out the door and never returned, leaving these men to their ignorance. But something in him resisted. Perhaps it was the years of enduring these small, cutting humiliations, or perhaps it was the desire to reclaim a piece of the respect he had earned through his work. Whatever it was, Alfred felt a fire ignite within him, a quiet but firm resolve to confront the situation. The watch in the case gleamed under the soft lights, a reminder of everything he had built, everything he had achieved. These men didn't know who he was, but soon they would. Without a word, Alfred turned and headed for the door, the sound of the salesman's laughter still echoing in his ears. But this wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. He had no intention of letting this moment pass without reminding them, and perhaps himself, of the worth that went beyond wealth, the worth that came from years of mastery and dedication. Alfred spent the night after his experience at the watch boutique wide awake, his mind racing. The disdainful laughter of the salesman echoed in his ears, mingling with memories from his past, times when others had doubted him, when he had been dismissed because of his modest beginnings. Yet, in each of those moments, he had found a way to rise above, driven by his passion for watchmaking. This time would be no different, he resolved. He would prove them wrong, not with words, but with his work. Determined to showcase his talent and reaffirm his relevance in the world of watchmaking, Alfred decided to arrange a small gathering at a local cafe known for hosting watch enthusiasts. It was a cozy, intimate venue, frequented by collectors and connoisseurs who appreciated the artistry behind fine timepieces. The cafe had a quiet charm, with its dark wood tables and walls adorned with vintage watch advertisements. It was a place where, once upon a time, Alfred had felt at home, surrounded by people who shared his passion. He spent the next few days preparing for the event. He carefully selected several of his most prized creations, classic, elegant watches with timeless designs that spoke to the heart of true craftsmanship. Each piece represented countless hours of meticulous work, from the intricate inner mechanisms to the smooth finishes and delicate engravings. They were a reflection of his life's work, and he hoped that by sharing them, he might reignite the appreciation for true artistry in an industry increasingly dominated by trends and extravagance. Alfred extended invitations to a mix of old friends, fellow watchmakers, and new acquaintances he had met through the years, people who, he believed, still value the essence of what made a timepiece more than just a status symbol. The cafe was the perfect setting for a quiet but meaningful showcase, a place where true enthusiasts could gather, away from the glitz and flash of high-end boutiques. The evening arrived, and Alfred arrived at the cafe early, setting up his watches on a simple display table. His heart swelled with pride as he arranged the timepieces, each one a masterpiece in its own right. He imagined the conversations he would have that night, discussing the nuances of watchmaking with those who truly appreciated the craft. For the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful. As the guests began to arrive, Alfred greeted them with a warm smile. Some of his old friends were there, nodding appreciatively as they examined his creations. A few younger faces dotted the room as well, people Alfred didn't recognize, but who had come to the event out of curiosity. At first, everything seemed to be going well. The atmosphere was light, the conversation engaging, and Alfred felt a renewed sense of purpose. However, as the cafe filled up, Alfred began to notice a shift in the tone of the gathering. More and more, the conversation veered away from the watches themselves and toward the brands behind them. A group of younger attendees, some of whom seemed more interested in taking selfies than in appreciating the craftsmanship, were loudly discussing the latest trends in luxury watches. They talked about brands that were popular with celebrities and influencers, throwing around words like exclusivity and limited editions, as if they were the true markers of quality. Alfred's heart sank a little as he realized that many of the attendees were not there to admire the artistry of his work. They were more interested in flaunting their knowledge of the latest high-end brands and discussing the prestige associated with owning a name, rather than the intricate skill involved in creating a timeless piece. It became increasingly clear that for these people, watches were not about art, they were about status. The moment that truly tested Alfred's resolve came when a self-important influencer, who had arrived fashionably late, made his way over to the display table. Dressed in a sharp tailored suit and sporting a watch so oversized and encrusted with diamonds that it screamed ostentation, the influencer examined Alfred's collection with a look of bemused disdain. Alfred could feel the tension building as the man glanced from one watch to the next, his expression unimpressed. "These designs," the influencer said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "are so outdated. I mean, who wears a watch like this anymore? People want something bold, something that makes a statement. He turned to the growing crowd around him and added, "These might have been great 50 years ago, but now? They're irrelevant." Laughter rippled through the group, and Alfred felt a wave of humiliation wash over him. His face flushed, not with anger, but with deep disappointment. He had poured his soul into these watches, into every detail of their design and function. To have them dismissed so flippantly, especially by someone who saw watches only as accessories, cut deeper than he had anticipated. For a brief moment, he questioned whether he had made a mistake in trying to reach out, whether the world had indeed moved on without him. But even in his discomfort, Alfred could not remain silent. He cleared his throat and tried to interject, his voice calm but firm. "These designs," he said, gesturing to the watches on the table, "aren't meant to follow trends. They're meant to last. A true timepiece doesn't need to be bold to make a statement. It speaks through its craftsmanship, its precision, and its history." But the conversation had already spiraled away from him. The influencer waved off Alfred's words with a dismissive hand, turning back to the crowd to continue discussing the latest limited edition releases from major luxury brands. Alfred's words were drowned out by the noise of laughter and chatter. He felt invisible again, much like he had in the boutique. As the evening wore on, Alfred considered leaving early. He had hoped this event would reignite his connection to the world of watchmaking, but instead, he felt more disconnected than ever. The crowd wasn't interested in the heart and soul of his craft, they were only interested in what was fashionable. Maybe, he thought, it was time to let go of the past, to accept that the world had changed. But just as he was about to gather his things and slip out, an older gentleman approached him, his demeanor quiet and respectful. He wore a simple watch on his wrist, one of Alfred's own designs, from many years ago. The man smiled softly as he looked at Alfred's display, his eyes filled with genuine admiration. "I followed your work for years," the man said, his voice steady and sincere. "I am a collector of your watches. Every one of your timepieces has a soul, they are more than just machines, they are pieces of art. Don't let them tell you otherwise." Alfred blinked, the words catching him off guard. The warmth in the man's voice, his admiration, gave Alfred a renewed sense of purpose. Maybe the world had changed, but there were still people who appreciated the true art of watchmaking. This man's encouragement was a glimmer of hope, a reminder that not all was lost. As the cafe emptied out, Alfred stayed a little longer, talking quietly with the older gentleman. In that moment, he realized that staying true to his craft was more important than chasing fleeting trends. He would continue doing what he loved, creating timeless pieces that spoke to the heart, just as they always had. The night hadn't gone as planned, but it wasn't a failure. It was a lesson, and one Alfred knew he would carry with him as he moved forward. Alfred's hands trembled slightly as he inspected the sketches for his latest design, a piece that he had poured his heart into over the past few months. It was a fusion of his signature classical craftsmanship and a touch of modern flair, a sleek, elegant timepiece that incorporated the kind of technological innovations popular with today's luxury buyers. In his mind, this watch represented his attempt to bridge the gap between the past and the present, the old and the new. But the industry had changed so much since he first began, and though he was proud of his work, a nagging doubt tugged at him. He wasn't sure if he could truly keep up with the ever-shifting demands of the luxury market. Flashy designs and celebrity endorsements seemed to dominate now, and Alfred's commitment to timeless quality felt increasingly out of place. Still, his passion for watchmaking wouldn't let him give up easily. He had crafted each piece with care and precision, blending the finest materials and intricate details that had always set his work apart. This watch was different, he thought. It combined his love for the past with an understanding of the present. If anything could re-establish his presence in the world of watchmaking, it was this. The opportunity to showcase his work was rapidly approaching. An upcoming prestigious watch fair, known for being a launchpad for innovators and trendsetters, seemed like the perfect venue to debut his design. The anticipation of unveiling his creation to a discerning audience filled Alfred with equal parts excitement and anxiety. He spent hours meticulously preparing the final touches on the watch, ensuring it would be ready for the big reveal. Yet, as the fair loomed closer, so did the pressure. His insecurities lingered like shadows. What if no one cared? What if his work truly was irrelevant in today's fast-paced, trend-driven world? Word of his plans to debut at the fair began to circulate, and soon enough, it reached the ears of his rival, Damien, a man who had always resented Alfred's success. Damien had made his name by riding the wave of whatever was trendy in the luxury market, gaining fame for flashy designs that catered to the elite's desire for the latest and greatest. His success was undeniable, but where Alfred's work was built on a foundation of skill and craftsmanship, Damien had always been more of a marketer than a true artisan. And now, sensing an opportunity to discredit Alfred publicly, Damien decided to challenge him directly. On the eve of the watch fair, Damien's challenge came like a thunderclap in the quiet calm Alfred had tried to create around his preparations. At a pre-fair event, where many of the industry's biggest names had gathered, Damien took the stage with a glint of arrogance in his eyes. "I hear that Alfred is preparing to debut a new design at the fair," Damien announced with a smirk, drawing the attention of the entire room. "I've got to say, I admire his persistence, but the truth is, in this market, there's no place for relics of the past. It's time we make way for the future, and I'm not sure Alfred can keep up." The crowd, mostly younger and more enamored with Damien's bold personality, chuckled at his remarks. The sting of the mockery, so publicly displayed, hit Alfred hard. He could feel the eyes of the room on him, the whispers of doubt circulating. There had always been rivalry in their world, but never before had Alfred felt so publicly humiliated. The fact that it was Damien, someone whose success was built on superficial trends, who was questioning the validity of his life's work, made the insult cut even deeper. That night, after the event, Alfred found himself walking the streets of the city in a haze. Doubt gnawed at him more than ever. He had dedicated his life to his craft, to creating watches that stood the test of time, both in design and durability. But in this moment, he couldn't help but question everything. Was he really out of touch? Had the world moved on without him, leaving his hard-earned skills to gather dust like the antique pieces that had once inspired him? The weight of it all pressed down on him, and for a fleeting moment, he considered abandoning his plans to attend the fair altogether. But then, as he sat alone on a park bench, staring at the sky as if searching for some sign of direction, a thought came to him. It wasn't about keeping up with trends, or proving himself to the likes of Damien, or even about reclaiming his place in the industry. It was about the watches. It had always been about the watches. The stories behind them. The meticulous craftsmanship that went into each piece, the dedication to something beautiful and enduring. That was the reason he had started down this path so many years ago. Not for fame, not for fortune, but for the love of creation. With renewed determination, Alfred stood from the bench. His path was clear now, he wouldn't back down. He wouldn't change who he was to fit in with the shifting tides of the industry. The watch he had designed was a reflection of everything he had learned and loved over the years, and whether or not the world was ready to embrace it, he would present it with pride. The night before the fair, Alfred worked late into the evening, making sure every detail was perfect. This wasn't just a debut, it was a reaffirmation of who he was and what he stood for. The next day, he would walk into the fair not as someone trying to prove his relevance, but as someone who had already made his mark on the world, simply reminding it of what true craftsmanship looked like. The day of the prestigious watch fair arrived, and Alfred stood before the grand entrance, his heart racing with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The venue buzzed with energy, showcasing the world's most renowned watchmakers and their latest innovations. As he stepped inside, the lavish displays of glimmering timepieces surrounded him, each reflecting the artistry and ambition of its creator. This was his moment to shine, to reveal his unique design that blended tradition with modern flair. As the fair began, attendees flowed past their booths. Alfred watched as groups of people gathered around Damien, his rival, drawn by the bright lights and bold advertising. Yet, as the minutes ticked by, he noticed something surprising. A handful of visitors began to drift toward Alfred's booth, captivated by the intricacy of his design and the story he shared. Damien, sensing the shift, approached Alfred's booth with a mocking grin. "What's this?" "A sentimental journey into the past," he taunted, gesturing dismissively at Alfred's latest creation. "Time to wake up, Alfred. The industry is moving forward, and you're still stuck reminiscing about old stories." Alfred felt the pressure of Damien's words, but he stood firm, the lessons learned from the luxury watch store still fresh in his mind. "Every watch tells a story," Alfred replied, his voice steady. "This piece isn't just a design, it's a tribute to my brother, with whom I've created countless watches." Damien scoffed, but Alfred's words resonated with the few visitors who had stopped to listen. They began to engage with him, asking questions about the craftsmanship, the inspiration behind his work, and the stories woven into each piece. Alfred felt a flicker of hope as the crowd around him grew, their interest shifting from flashy trends to genuine artistry. As the day progressed, Alfred's booth continued to attract more visitors, many of whom expressed their admiration not just for the watch, but for the stories behind it. Even as Damien's loud promotional efforts faded into the background, Alfred found himself sharing connections with people who valued authenticity over flash. By the end of the fair, Alfred's booth had become a sanctuary for those seeking substance. He realized that the true competition lay not in outshining Damien with gimmicks, but in connecting with others through shared experiences and heartfelt storytelling. Alfred left the venue not only with praise and newfound connections, but also with a deeper understanding of himself and his craft. He had faced his rival, stood firm in his beliefs, and transformed a moment of potential defeat into a celebration of authenticity. A few months later, Alfred stood outside the luxury watch store, his heart steady, his mind clear. This time, he was no longer the uncertain man who had walked through these doors before, mocked and belittled. He had returned as a man who had found peace in his craft, as someone who no longer sought approval from fleeting trends, but from the legacy he had built over decades of devotion to his work. His latest creation, the one that fused his love of classic watchmaking with a touch of modern innovation, rested in the velvet-lined box he carried in his hands. Today, he would present it to the very people who had once dismissed him. As Alfred pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped inside, the familiar scent of leather and polished steel greeted him. The gleaming display cases showcased the world's most expensive timepieces, but none of them held the depth of history that Alfred's design did. His eyes swept the room, catching the glances of several patrons and the sales staff. Some recognized him, their expressions shifting from disdain to curiosity, as if they could sense that something had changed. He approached the center of the store where a small group had gathered, many of them the same individuals who had witnessed his humiliation months ago. Alfred cleared his throat, commanding their attention. "I'd like to show you something," he said, his voice calm but firm. He slowly opened the box, revealing the timepiece inside. It was a striking blend of old-world elegance and cutting-edge mechanics, its face an intricate balance of simplicity and innovation. The room quieted as people leaned in to get a closer look. "This is not just a watch," Alfred began, his voice growing softer yet filled with emotion. "This is a part of my story. A story that began many years ago with a man who loved watches as much as I do, my father. He wasn't a wealthy man, but he had a deep appreciation for craftsmanship and the beauty that comes with it. He passed that love on to me." The patrons listened intently, the mockery from months earlier nowhere to be found in their expressions. As Alfred shared his journey, his deep connection to his father, and how the watch in his hands was inspired by the lessons he had learned from him, something in the room shifted. The story behind the watch was as valuable as the materials that made it. Suddenly, from the back of the crowd, a young salesman stepped forward, his face pale with recognition. He had been among those who had laughed at Alfred before. Now, he looked as though he had seen a ghost. You're Alfred, the famous watchmaker," the salesman stammered, his voice filled with disbelief. "My father. He used to speak about you all the time." Alfred's brows furrowed in surprise. The salesman continued, his voice filled with emotion. "My father collected your watches. He used to tell me how you and he would talk about watchmaking for hours, how you both shared this passion. He said you were one of the greatest watchmakers he ever knew. I can't believe I didn't recognize you before." The room went silent as the young man spoke, the air thick with an unexpected sense of reverence. The other patrons looked on, their expressions softened by the sincerity of the moment. "My father passed away a few years ago," the salesman said, his eyes misting over. "But he always treasured your work. He even showed me a letter you wrote him once, thanking him for supporting your craft. I was too young to appreciate it back then, but hearing you now, I see it. I see what he saw." Alfred's throat tightened, his hands gripping the box a little more firmly as memories of his own father flooded back. He had never known that this man's father had been one of his admirers, one of his supporters when he was first starting out. The connection struck him deeply, reminding him of the true power of his work, not in the watches themselves, but in the way they touched the lives of others. A murmur spread through the crowd, the tone now one of admiration rather than skepticism. Alfred could feel the change. The salesmen who had mocked him, the patrons who had dismissed him, were now looking at him with a newfound respect. Not because he was rich or successful, but because he was real, because his story, and the story of his father, resonated with them on a human level. "The watch I've created," Alfred said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of experience, "is not just a reflection of my skills or my past. It's a tribute to the people we love, the legacies we carry with us, and the stories we continue to write. That's what makes this timepiece unique. It's not about trends or flash. It's about time well spent, time remembered." The room was quiet as Alfred gently closed the box, the soft click of the lid echoing in the stillness. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, one by one, patrons began to approach him, their faces full of appreciation. "I had no idea," one woman said softly. "The story behind your work, it makes it all the more beautiful. I see now why my father respected you so much," the young salesman added, his voice barely above a whisper. The crowd slowly dispersed, leaving Alfred standing at the center of the room. He felt lighter than he had in years. The doubts, the humiliation, the pressure to conform to what others wanted, they all melted away. He had stayed true to himself, and in doing so, had found not just professional validation, but personal fulfillment. He was no longer just a watchmaker, but a storyteller, weaving his own history into each piece he created. As Alfred left the store, he smiled to himself. He hadn't just proven his worth to the world, he had rediscovered it for himself. His father's legacy, his passion for craftsmanship, and the connections he had forged through his work, they were the true measure of his success. And that, he knew, would endure far longer than any trend ever could. Thanks for watching. How would you rate this story? Give it 1 to 5 stars in the comments and let me know what you thought. This is a brand new channel, and your support means the world to me. If you enjoyed the story, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you never miss an episode. Your likes, comments, and shares help this community grow, and I'd be so grateful to have you along for the journey. See you next time.